January 17, 1944. Somewhere above the gray cloud ceiling of occupied France, the thin winter light fractured across the wings of an American B-26 Marauder as it banked sharply toward a second bombing run. The engines, four synchronized roars of mechanical confidence, thundered through the cold air like a relentless heartbeat. Below, in a command post tucked inside a commandeered French farmhouse, German officers stared at their plotting tables, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The sound of those engines, steady, repetitive, and returning again, would become the symbolic echo of American capacity, a sound they would learn to fear with growing disbelief. Hours earlier, the Luftwaffe staff had assumed the American formation had concluded its mission for the day, as was customary in their own exhausted air units. But as the drones intensified once more, the officers turned their binoculars upward and saw the same squadrons circling back, forming up for yet another attack. The engine sound, the recurring symbol of this narrative, carved itself into memory. It was not merely noise, it was the roar of an industry that never slept. To understand the shock etched across those German faces, one must step back into the collapsing architecture of the Luftwaffe in early 1944. What had begun with the brilliance and fire of early victories was now crocking under the weight of attrition, shortages, and impossible demands. German pilots were often grounded for lack of aviation fuel, spare parts, and airworthy machines. In many fighter wings, new recruits received barely 30 hours of flight training, down from the 90-plus hours enjoyed by their predecessors in 1940. Their commanders recalculated endlessly, trying to stretch each drop of fuel, each engine, each pilot. They expected the Americans to be bound by similar limits. But the Americans operated under a different economic sky altogether. By mid-1943, U.S. factories were producing more aircraft each month than Germany could produce in an entire season. According to official wartime production records, the United States delivered over 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone, an almost unimaginable tide of aluminum, engines, and ambition. Where German units rationed engine hours, American aircrews were encouraged, even expected, to fly repeatedly, returning to the skies with the routine certainty of a factory shift. For German officers accustomed to strict conservation, the idea of pilots returning from one mission only to rearm, refuel, and launch a second or even third sortie the same day felt like a violation of natural limits. In the Luftwaffe's operational reports from the Western Front, one finds notations of astonishment at how the enemy continues operations without observable pause. The phrase appears repeatedly, like an incredulous echo. Each time the American engines returned, our symbolic sound, they contradicted German assumptions about fatigue, capacity, and human endurance. The emotional contrast could not have been sharper. German aviators, once confident heirs of Europe's most advanced air force, now carried the weight of supply failure and strategic collapse. They expected the Americans to tire as they had, to retreat after one mission, to bow to the same scarcity. Instead, they watched formations of American aircraft rise again like a machine powered by something other than fuel, powered by an industrial ideology that placed faith in abundance. One particularly noted moment came during the American raids on the Pas-de-Calais rocket installations. German radar tracked the first wave at dawn. By midday, a second wave appeared, this time reinforced by fighter escorts that flew as if fatigue were a foreign word. Late in the afternoon, when a third set of bombers approached, some German commanders believed it had to be a misinterpretation of the data, but the engines confirmed the truth. The drone of twin- and four-engined aircraft returned with a rhythm that mocked scarcity itself. American aircrews, for their part, were not lacking fear or fatigue. Many recalled the dread that came with the command to fly again after losing comrades only hours before. Yet they rose because their system, built on scale and redundancy, allowed them to. When an aircraft returned riddled with flak holes, it was surrounded by crews who had the parts, tools, and fuel to repair it quickly. When a pilot collapsed from exhaustion, another trained replacement stood ready. The American war machine was a living organism with arteries made of assembly lines and lungs filled with petroleum. The German perception began to shift. What they initially viewed as a single day of aggressive American overreach gradually revealed itself as a pattern. The United States was capable of sustaining a tempo of air war that the Luftwaffe could no longer match. In interrogation reports of captured Luftwaffe officers, several admitted that the repeated sound of American engines returning the same day broke morale more effectively than any bomb. It was as though your Air Force could regenerate within hours, one officer reflected after the war. We understood then that our struggle was no longer tactical, but existential. The recurring symbol, the engine roar, grew heavier with meaning. It became the soundtrack of a war turning irrevocably against the Reich. Every return flight implied unlimited resources. Every repeated sortie announced the collapse of German hopes for parity. Where German doctrine had once emphasized precision and elite skill, American strategy leaned on overwhelming force, industrial repetition, and a faith in democratic capacity. And within that contrast lay a transformation. German soldiers who once believed their system to be the pinnacle of modern militarization began recognizing a different truth, that a society built on collective participation, on shared industry and mobilized democracy could achieve a scale far greater than an authoritarian state built on rigid hierarchy. The Americans were not simply flying more missions, they were demonstrating the power of a nation whose strength came from its people, from open economic systems, from the ability to adapt and produce without fear of dissent. By the time the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the shock had hardened into resignation. German officers no longer questioned whether the Americans would fly multiple missions daily. They expected it, feared it, and rearranged their defenses not around scarce German capacity, but around the endless American rhythm. The engine sound continued, day after day, like a verdict handed down from the sky. Years later, in the quiet after the war, survivors on both sides reflected on that sound. To German veterans, it recalled a moment when they realized they were fighting not only a military opponent, but an entire industrial civilization. To American airmen, it symbolized grit, the willingness to rise again even when fear lingered in the cockpit. And so the story ends where it began, with the echo of those engines across a winter horizon. That sound, steady, returning, unstoppable, became a reminder that freedom, when supported by the collective strength of millions, carries a power greater than any single weapon. It was more than machinery. It was the voice of a society that believed in abundance, that believed in possibility, that believed the skies themselves could be shaped by democratic will. In the end, the German officers could not believe how many missions the Americans flew because they had never imagined a world where ordinary citizens, united in purpose, could build something so vast. But the engines told the story. They roared through the war as symbols of limitless resolve, reminding the world that the strength of a free people is measured not by a single action, but by the courage to rise again and again.